Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us live, if you are joining us live. Doing a special show tonight. I have a special guest here. Aron Ra is here. I'm going to be interviewing him kind of briefly and going over some things that I've been covering since I've been covering Darth Dawkins. It's not a recent turn towards dealing with young Earth claims and creationism, but he's kind of gotten back into that mode. And since he's been doing that, and since I've been kind of poking fun at them, I thought, and Peter was nice enough, I'm going to go for it, who is Aron Ra's producer, was nice enough to kind of set this thing up. And Aron was generous enough, charitable enough to come on here and let me pester him with questions about some of these goofy claims. So without further ado, Aron Ra is joining me here. Evening, Aron. It's great to meet you. So I'm a big fan of your stuff. I've been following you for a few years. I don't watch your stuff probably as much as I should. Otherwise, I wouldn't have as many questions as I'm going to be asking and wouldn't be quite as confused when I hear some of these young Earth creationist claims. But I'll let you introduce yourself real quick. And then I don't think you really need much of an introduction, but yeah, go ahead.
I'm just this guy, you know.
Okay. Anything that you want to mention to the audience about anything you've got going on now? I know you're doing the Blasphemer's Bible as one series and a couple other things.
Yeah. When I do the Blasphemer's Bible, that's a fun one. That's on Saturdays, and I have people who are very knowledgeable of Scripture, and it's surprisingly entertaining to get a handful of these people. And there's one guy he's in Israel, speaks Hebrew, and he always has a new perspective on the way that we in the West interpret the Bible. He says, but in the Hebrew Bible, it says this. So that's always fun. And then on Sundays, I do a reading of the Book of Mormon, which Mark Twain has described the Book of Mormon as chlorophyll in print, and or chloroform on print. Yeah, chloroform on print. I'm sorry. But we've countered that by having a handful of ex-Mormon comedians on to read with me. So yeah, that's a bucket of chuckles.
That's a great idea.
It's really, hands down, the best way to read the Book of Mormon.
Sounds like it. Yeah. Even Mark Twain to be like, all right, I stand corrected. This is pretty good.
The book is still awful.
Right.
But in both of these are following in the spirit of the way that I read the Quran. Because what I would do with the Quran is I've read a bunch of different interpretations or translations of the Quran, English translations, like a half a dozen. I would compare the different translations and compare those with tafsirs and other commentaries, but not the hadiths, because there's just too many hadiths. Nobody can even tell how many hadiths there are. Yeah. So I just excluded that. But I knew that if I were raised in Punjab, India, I would have known Muslims, I would have known Sikhs, I would have known Hindus, but if I probably wouldn't have met a Christian. So if I had picked up a Bible and read the Bible, I wouldn't know, one, that the serpent in the garden was supposed to be Satan. I wouldn't know that Jesus was supposed to be Yahweh. Right. It was like the incarnation thereof.
Yeah.
So these are things that are not in the Bible. I didn't know that there was supposed to be. They wouldn't have known that there was supposed to be a Trinity: God, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost all being the same character and all that. Yep. Because those are interpretations that Christians read into it that are not actually expressed in the text. So I suspected that were I to read the Quran, I would have much the same disadvantage, and in fact, that is the case, because the Quran actually doesn't tell a whole lot. I had a panel of ex-Muslims and a couple of believing Muslims at a couple of times, but mostly ex-Muslims, and everybody speaks Arabic except for one or two of those people, and most of them spoke Arabic, and so they were all raised in Islam, and they could give me the Muslim interpretation or tradition regarding each verse. So I would write out my blog post about what I thought it was saying, in all these different comparisons, and then I would have this panel of people tell me what I got right or wrong, and then add their other inflections, interpretations on that. And that was a kind of I think that, again, that was the best way to read the Quran.
Right. Yeah.
When I was done with that, they said, well, you should do the Bible now and do the Book of Mormon too.
Yeah. I've seen a couple of those ones that you did in the Quran. Those were interesting. And some of the guys that you had on there were they had some really interesting takes on it. Because I did try to read that. I've tried reading one translation of the Quran, and it's not easy reading. I made it through, but yeah, for somebody not in the culture, some of it just it just doesn't work on me.
Yeah.
Well, I guess with that, we'll get right into it. So, what the concern that I had with some of this stuff that's been coming up, this is something that keeps popping up with Young Earth Creationists, especially in the YouTube area, is this argument. And I don't know how well versed you are in either countering this or how often. Maybe this is just an old and a layup question, but is that the snake hissing?
Yeah.
Oh wow, he's
that's one of the reasons I'm holding him, is because I'm trying to handle him every day so that he gets over this thing. It's so irritating when he's this is the only snake I have that's like this, that is a bad mood all the time.
Yeah.
He's like scared and angry and reactionary. And I swear if he was a person, he would have voted for Trump.
Yeah, you need to just kill that with kindness as much as you can. Hopefully he'll calm down as he ages. Yeah. I don't know.
All the other snakes have gotten the routine, and most of them have even started asking to be taken out and held. So, but he never presents. He always hides in his rock. There's some people that are just like that.
I was going to say, man, I'll try not to take it personal when he's hissing at me. So the big question is this constant claim that pops up about the improbability of protein formation. And so I'm just going to lay this up as generally as possible, but it always seems to be, it's either like the first one that pops out, or it becomes sort of like a Mott and Bailey kind of thing. They'll start talking about the fossil record or whatever somebody brings up.
Let's first address the whole notion of improbability. Because the people that are using any kind of improbability argument are all basing it on the same thing. That if there's nobody, deliberately deciding in advance the way things should go and then magically wishing these things into being, then they don't understand that there are natural processes that are going to be deterministic over time, given certain factors. There are many different processes in different fields that are going to produce some kind of result. And when you have factors like imperfect replication and reproduction, and you mix that with natural selection, now you've got a deterministic factor. And this is just, these kind of eventualities are going to occur. But these people don't understand natural processes. They think somebody has to be in charge or else it just goes crazy, and that everything is a dice roll. So you just roll the dice to see things develop in a particular way. And what is the probability against rolling the dice and getting? Because shit is not that random. They're all about random. Well, you believe in random chance. That's what they're talking about. They think everything's a fucking dice roll. They don't understand deterministic processes. And there's aspects of mere chemistry that lead in these particular directions. Yeah. So the development of proteins, and we now have studies showing the possibility of abiotic proteins, but it's all entirely chemical. So they're looking for an increasing desperation, I think. They want to really, really, really pretend, and it is pretend, that they're best friends with the most powerful being imaginable, and that they're not really going to die, and that if they ever really need to, that 2 + 2 can be 5. If they ask the powers behind the universe real nice, because they're close friends and all.
Yeah.
They want to make believe. They want an alternate reality. They don't like the real reality, so they're going to reject that one. And this is what faith is all about. Pretending to know things you don't know so that you can make believe something else, wherein you can pretend to be much more important than you are. You're the reason the universe exists. It was created for you.
Well, sure. It wasn't created for that snake. No, I mean, because one of his talking cousins, tricked a woman, and to hell with them. I agree with you. The thing that I find weird is this. I mean, I struggle with this probability kind of stuff too, because they'll start talking about, well, what are the odds that this protein can happen in this chain and then this chain and then this chain? I'm like, well, we have life here, so what is the probability of all of that stuff happening? And all of those mechanisms were put in place to resemble this highly improbable sequence that you're marveling at, and it's a God.
Yeah, and
you
just remember that they're thinking about what is the probability of this happening without a process, without any deterministic factors involved. That it's entirely with it would just take your hands off the wheel, close your eyes, and just see where the car goes.
Yeah,
that's the way they think shit works.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. So in that vein, there is a guy, I don't know if you're familiar with him, because this isn't the first time he's been quoted out of context, but I will bring up the ding dong's name that brings this up. It's Darth Dawkins. He has been frequently cherry picking an already cherry picked quote from a scientist named Eugene Koonin, who wrote a book called The Logic of Chance, I think is the name of his. And I don't know if that book is intended for lay persons, or if it's, I think it's more of a textbook. But and for whatever reason, because Koonin is in sort of this camp where he has issues with the modern synthesis, the modern synthesis is explaining some of these broader concepts to lay people. Guys like Darth, and there's actually some publications. I think Koonin has been quoted by like Answers in Genesis and a few other places as being, well, this guy right here has a problem with either, they'll take a quote and say, well, he's got a problem with the fossil record. And then therefore, and I guess with that, they can just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, well, they're not unanimous in how evolution works. Therefore, it's all a lie, or it's a trick. The seams are showing. If you're familiar with Koonin's stuff, though, I kind of wonder about this, because this seems really old. The fossil record thing. What kind of criticism is that? Because my very layperson understanding of that is that we've made an enormous amount of progress in assembling the fossil record and what it can teach us. And so I don't understand where these guys are going with this. And I was wondering if you kind of want to start generally with that.
Yeah, people who you remember, you're talking about people who first of all think that mammoths are dinosaurs, because some of them have made statements like that. They think that plesiosaurs are dinosaurs. They think everything that's big and dead is a dinosaur. And all they know about the fossil record is the few plastic pieces they've seen in a prehistoric play set at the grocery store. That's what they know about paleontology.
Yeah.
The mammoth is purple and the plesiosaur is green.
I think
yellow.
I had that set. Yeah.
Exactly. But when that's the limit of your knowledge, and you think there was another toy set by Aurora. I had these models when I was a kid, where they would have a little piece of ground, and you would have a diatrima, or you would have a mammoth, or you would have an Allosaurus, and different dinosaurs, and all of their little mats all the little ground pieces were supposed to fit together if you had the whole collection. And it told you that Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon lived at the same time. Okay, that's fair, because you had models of those, but then those would also be interacting with Allosaurus from the Jurassic and Triceratops from the Cretaceous and pterodactyls from the Triassic. What the hell? There's Triassic, the whole Mesozoic, and you got Paleozoic stuff, and they all live at the same time. And people seemed to think that. They thought that, I don't know, for the first 10 hours of life on Earth, we had all of these things living at once before 99% of everything went extinct.
Well, they had to, because God gave us gasoline. Right. That was the point,
right? Yeah, and these people have no concept of what fossil fuels or what that even means. But yes. So they don't have a concept, first of all, that all of the animals we have today didn't already exist always. So when they start realizing how many different versions of a given species there is, I mean a given genus or family, how broad that is and how interconnected they are, when you start looking at the actual biodiversity just of things that exist today, if you start trying to do just taxonomy on things that are alive now, will you shut up?
He's got a question.
Yeah, well, I don't know why he's going to, but he's going to get over this. I'm going to have him for like 20 years, and he's going to get over this shit. I'm not putting up with all this crankiness. I just don't hold him enough, apparently.
He'll calm down, or maybe he just gets chattier. I don't know. Maybe this is him in a good mood.
Yeah, somebody asked in the comments. I said I noticed that Canadian Atheist, who offers you $10 Canadian, says, Aron, how tempted were you to pick up that little green mamba? I'm sure Lalandra would love it. By the way, looking forward to next year at BajaCon. I was at a reptile convention in Austin, and I saw a snake that I hadn't seen in any of the other reptile cons that I've been to. So I picked it up. It's in one of these pie trays with a lid on it, all clear plastic. I pick it up, and I'm looking at the pattern on it. Wow, this is interesting. What is this? She said, green mamba. This was the first time that I'd seen hot snakes for sale as pets in one of these conventions. Every other one that I've been to, they would be at worst, they would be like hognose snakes. Rear fang, mildly venomous, not a thing to worry about. And at this table, though, there's the mamba, and then right next to that, I noticed there's a rattlesnake, and then next to that was a gaboon viper. I'm like, oh, these are pets. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. So I want to just take on a couple of other questions that I see here.
Okay.
I'm wondering, let's see, this is Vesta Freya says, I'm wondering if you've read the latest paper from Nature about finding eDNA from mastodons, reindeer, rodents, and geese in Greenland from 2 million years ago. I haven't read it yet. I just found out about it just minutes ago, just as we were getting ready for this show. I've got the article pulled up on another panel. I will be reading it later. So, and then the next one says, Ox says, Aron Ra, do you believe in the Big Bang or that the universe always was? Well, I don't believe in either of those things. I have always been, I view my worldview as such as it is this is an investigation. And so I don't want to make believe in any particular thing. And I've never been a fan of Big Bang cosmology. The way I look at that is that we just, it was like 100 years ago, barely, that we started figuring out anything about the cosmos.
Yeah.
And so for us to say, I think it's just short of time with the sloth of data, and I realize how much data we've actually brought in is kind of impressive, but I'm also putting that back on the cosmic scale, and that puts the parameters in a different perspective, so that we don't actually know. So anybody that says that they know is lying. So I'm open to possibilities should there be possibilities to consider. And what it appears to me thus far, okay, there may cosmic inflation. All right, I'm not going to argue against the facts. Does that necessarily mean a singularity? I've talked to a number of cosmologists who can't agree on whether there's a singularity is absolutely necessary. Whether the Big Bang was the beginning, no, nobody seems to believe that anymore.
Yeah,
right. I think even Stephen Hawking said, and he was the only one that ever said that everything came from nothing. But in fact, he didn't actually say that. He said it only looks like that from our perspective.
Yep.
So that's the thing that irritates me all the time. Creationists always ask me, well, you believe everything came from nothing? No, you do. I don't believe that.
Right. Right.
I don't believe everything came from nothing. I believe everything came from God. I'm like, okay, well then what did God make everything out of?
Himself.
Yeah. Exactly. So ridiculous. So, and to be honest, I mean, I don't like to have this attitude, but I do in this case. I mean, I'm in a don't know, don't care aspect. It is whether the universe had a beginning or how it began, if it had a beginning, is completely irrelevant to anything I actually study. None of that is going to change the fact that we are evolving apes and that the Bible is man-made folklore that has already been disproved.
Good points.
Yeah. Even the existence of God wouldn't change either of those facts.
There's a statement here, kind of a shout out before I get into a bigger question. It's from Dildo Baggins, easily one of my favorite YouTube usernames. You want to put that up?
Name. That's funny.
He says, not really a question, but I'd like to thank Aron for being one of the people to break me from the cult that is YEC, the Young Earth Creationist. So, yeah, there you go. And then we got a two-part, well, it's one question, but it's from King Xerxes. question for Aron. Jeffrey Tompkins is a PhD geneticist from the University of Clemson, allegedly, and an employee of Institute for Creation Research. He has been recently featured in creationist media as having disproven that chromosome 2 fusion is indicative of human common ancestry with apes.
Well, then I will wait to see see them award the Nobel Prize to him for having overturned such solid research.
Yeah, I had not heard of this, so that's pretty interesting.
Because it didn't happen. Creationists lie. That's their job. Their belief system is a lie that can only be defended by lies. That's why lies are all the defense you ever see for it.
Yep, fair enough.
And so I offered a number of different creationists offer this challenge, and I've done so a couple of times in live debates. I did it with what was his name? Somebody Jackson, I think it was, who was touted as being some kind of genius. I disagree, based on my limited interaction with the man. And then there was another one, Sal Cordova, who was supposed to be a geneticist, and I realized after I started talking to him that no, he's not really.
I know Sal.
I asked both of them to give me one actual fact, anything that we can verify, that we can both verify is actually true and indicative of creation. Both of those things. Because I've seen people come up with things that are actually true, but that don't actually relate to their argument.
Yeah.
Or that don't support their argument at all, or that evolution accounts for and explains better than creation does. And the rest of the time, it's stuff that isn't even true.
Yeah.
So neither person could come up with a single thing. Jackson thought he had something.
Yeah, I was going to say, did they attempt it? And then you are like, no, that's not it. And they
thought he had something. And usually the only answer you get from these people, and this is what I got from Sal, is, well, you can't explain blank. Sorry. If we never explain blank, that will still not be evidence of a magic invisible man.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never really understood that, because especially when these guys try to also tout themselves as being paragons of logic, it's like you realize now that you're just basically appealing to ignorance. Like, because I can't offer you an alternative explanation, you're just going to run off and like, oh, you're going to give me the claim. Well, you can't judge me for attributing all this stuff to a supernatural being or a disembodied mind that's, a personality that created it. Like, I don't think that's how anything works, but all right. Yeah. If that's your stance, I'm just going to excuse that.
I can pretend is listening to everything I say. He's listening to everything I think. He's my magic imaginary friend. And you can't take that away from me, because he makes me feel all squishy inside.
And he has never once made it sunshiny when it's been raining. And I asked many times for things like that when I was a stupid kid raised in church. Like, well, wait, if I ask God for X, then he'll do it if I pray really hard.
Yeah, false promises. I mean, Jesus said that if you believe, every prayer will be answered. God will do everything you want. And you yourself can do all these things. You can do greater things than Jesus. You can tell that mountain to jump into the sea. All you got to do is believe
You have to have
enough.
Faith the size of a mustard seed, which is a goofy
And what does that mean? Believe hard enough.
Yeah.
That means reality is somehow bends to your whim.
You squeeze. I guess it's an exercise. It's like doing crunches or something like that. You can build your faith up.
Yeah, it is really hard to reason with people who have abandoned reason.
Yeah,
and have compartmentalized it so that they can be reasonable in any other aspect, but not this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that going through some of the stuff that I see, that just the amount of. Because usually what I'll see is that I'll see a conversation between a few people. If it's ever with me, I will usually tell somebody, like, I'm not interested in debating your skepticism about evolution, because I don't have any and I'm not an expert. So I'm not an evolutionary biologist, so I don't want to do that. And then inevitably they'll bring up something like, well, here's why dendrochronology doesn't work. Here's why the physics don't work. Here's why, and it's like, what did I just say? I'm not into evolutionary biology, and I don't have a background in any of the hard sciences, and I'm kind of sure you don't either. So, you can miss me with that, and we can talk about something I do know something about, like, biblical criticism or something like that. But
funny when you get these few people who have thrown away their own education, because there's a few people, there's a handful who have legitimate degrees.
Yeah.
Andrew Snelling is one of my favorite examples. He has a legitimate Bachelor of Science degree in geology. He himself personally dated the Kungura formation in the billions of years, and he showed all the specific techniques on how to do that, the types, multiple types of radiometric dating done to do that. And then simultaneously, at the same time that he's writing solid mainstream research to science journals, he is also working for the bullshit factory that would become Answers in Genesis, wherein he has to lie for a living and say that the entire fossil record is because of the flood that he can prove never happened. There are people who just want to believe what they want to believe, and they don't care what the truth is. They know it's not the truth. They're going to believe it anyway because it's the magic world of pretend.
Who was that man's name?
Andrew Snelling.
Andrew Snelling.
There are a handful of others too. There's another one. I want to say Garner, Anthony Garner, and then I discovered something with them. I was reading an article by Snelling, and then I read a similar article by Garner where they were both writing about the same animal, and one of them argued that Acanthus stega cannot be a transitional species because its legs were designed for swimming, and the other one. And they know that it's designed for swimming because the legs are incapable of supporting it out of water. And the other one argued that Acanthus stega can't be a transitional species because its legs were designed for walking. So they're arguing against each other, and they don't realize it because their articles were printed like 5 years apart, something like that. So it's whatever bullshit excuse they can come up with. It doesn't matter, just as long as they can make believe that it looks like there was a creator and that we're extra special. And damn that dog.
Falcor. That is his name, right? Falcor?
Yeah.
It's a good bark on that dog.
Uncontrollable thing that goes off every couple of minutes.
Is he a purebred husky? Is that what he is?
No. He's a Great Pyrenees.
Oh, Great Pyrenees. That's right. Okay.
Yeah. Though I suspect that he may have there's a Great Pyrenees Golden Retriever mix. I think that he's got some of that in there. But well, whatever it is, he does not stop barking. It's almost nonstop. It's virtually maddening.
I'm going to get to a couple of these other questions here. Let's see.
Somebody says, AJ Heeb for $5 says, Aron, thanks for your definition of evidence. It has proved to be a useful standard when engaging with theists. Thank you. And for anybody that's curious about what that definition is, a fact is objectively verifiable information, something we can both show is actually correct. It's something that is either not a dispute because we both take it for granted in a given hypothetical, for example, or it is indisputable in that it is objectively verifiable. So the fact is one thing. And then the evidence is a body of facts that are positively indicative of and or exclusively concordant with one available position or hypothesis over any other. And the basic dictionary definition is a fact that indicates. And so I have to extrapolate what fact is because believers think whatever they believe is a fact because they believe it.
Yeah, facts can be magical. Yep.
Yeah, and then they think that evidence means any fact that would also would still be a fact. Any fact that would still be a fact if creationism was true, they therefore say is evidence. But no, evidence has to indicate. In other words, it has to indicate one position, or it has to be exclusively concordant with one position, meaning that it can also eliminate another position. So this fact implies that this other thing is not true.
Right.
One example that I bring up is you're paddling your boat to the beach of a small island. You've been told that no one has ever been to this island. You're going to be the first person here. You get there and you see the highly recognizable cleated boot prints across the beach. Now, this is upon arrival. Somebody else has been there. There were no witnesses. Nobody saw anybody walking there. But you see a string of boot prints, somebody walked there. And that fact is evidence against the claim that nobody's ever been to that beach before.
It's a good definition. Yeah, thanks for that.
So for people wanting evidence of evolution, one of the examples I give is that, one of them is that we see evolution happening. And of course, you have to understand what evolution is, and nobody wants to. Creationists don't want to. They don't want to admit what evolution is. They want it to be a religion. They want it to be anything but what it is, because they know that the biodiversity is demonstrable, it's verifiable, and they can't argue against it. And they even argue against macroevolution without knowing what macroevolution is. Because
I heard it.
The big argument in the 19th century, the thing that Darwin was famous for, the title of his fucking book, the argument was Carolus Linnaeus had worked out taxonomy, and he realized that all of these species that he was trying to classify, they weren't all in boxes of created kinds like what the creationists make it out to be.
Yeah.
They were in a long series, in a phylogenetic tree of parent groups within further ancestral groups. And this completely contradicts creationism. This implies a genetic relationship. But of course, he didn't know anything. He published this in 1735. He doesn't know what genetics are. He didn't know that speciation was possible. He thought that speciation could only occur as an act of special creation by God. And so that was the argument for 100 years. You can't have a new species. You can have variation within a species, but you can't have variation between species, because the reason is that between species, they don't interbreed. You know, between like horses and donkeys, you only get mules, right? Mules are sterile. So now we know that horses and donkeys have a common relationship. They have a common ancestor. And it's at some point, you can get variations within a group, within a species, that can still hybridize and still have something productive. But there's a point when they get far enough apart genetically that they don't produce fertile offspring anymore. And then if they get a little further apart, they don't produce viable offspring anymore. So that's what speciation is. So Carolus Linnaeus was arguing that you can't have new species unless God creates them. And then later on, Carolus Linnaeus changed his mind and said, you know what, we've got so much evidence that speciation is happening that I no longer believe it necessarily has to be from God. There's another way that speciation is happening, but he doesn't know how. He couldn't figure that out. So that he died with that dilemma. And Darwin proposed the first two working mechanisms that could actually produce new species. Now, he still didn't have a full explanation of it. We needed Gregor Mendel, the monk Gregor Mendel, who discovered Darwin's dilemma. How are the inheritable units of information being passed down from father and mother into the offspring? And then Hugo de Vries comes up with mutation a couple decades later, which explains how new varieties come into being. You know, Darwin just knows that there are new varieties. He doesn't know where they're coming from. But he has an explanation for the origin of species by means of natural selection. And if you get into an argument with Kent Hovind or Ken Ham or any of the leading creationists, they all admit that speciation happens. How does it happen? By natural selection. They admit to the origin of species by natural selection, but they reject to macroevolution, that's the definition. They say they object to macroevolution by calling it Darwinism, because I don't know what any of those fucking words mean.
Right. And that's something that bothers me about that, because I don't know what they mean by that. And thank you for kind of like pointing that out, because there was one, my brother, actually a YouTuber, he was having a conversation with Darth Dawkins, ding dong that he is. And he asked him, do you believe in Darwinian evolution? And it's just one of these questions like, what do you mean by that? Are you asking me, do I acknowledge evolutionary biology? Or are you asking me, what Darwinian biology?
Interpret that. Darwinian evolution, you could be distinguishing the natural selection and sexual selection. Those are the Darwinian mechanisms. You could be distinguishing those mechanisms from Lamarckian evolution, which, apart from some epigenetics, Lamarckian evolution has been proven defunct, or not been supported at all. So that could be that distinction. Or by Darwinian evolution, do you mean in Europe they would still call, some of the older professors would still refer to evolution as Darwinism, but that's something that was going on in Europe, wasn't going on in the U.S. So if you're European and you say Darwinism, then I might think that maybe you're just talking about evolution. But in the United States, if you say Darwinism, then I figure you're a creationist and you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Bingo. Yeah, that was where I was going with that. No, that's interesting. So I think the next time, if I'm ever asked that, like, are you a Darwinist? Do you believe in? I'll just be like Lamarckian
There's
all
no
the way.
such thing as a Darwinist, unless
just,
you're contrasting that with Lamarckian.
but I'm just going to admit to being a Lamarckian, and then let them. And then
the
let me go
argument
on
over
for that.
Darwinism versus Lamarckism was 1930.
That might be more contemporary than some of the stuff they're bringing up, though. I mean, that might be cutting edge for some of them.
Yeah. So, like, when they want to say that that Hitler was a Darwinist, no, he absolutely was not. Hitler wrote about Darwinian evolution one time only. That was in Mein Kampf, wherein he said that belief in the evolution of a new species was a sin against the eternal creator. He said that new species could only, or that new variants could only come within kinds, within definite limits, and only within their kind. But the evolution of a new kind / species was a sin against the eternal creator. So no, he was not a Darwinist. And by the way, Darwin was not a eugenist either. No. Darwin is often blamed for the eugenics that was going on against the Aboriginal people of Australia. But in fact, decades before Darwin came up with his theory, he went to Australia and saw that eugenics program was already underway, and he wrote about how awful it was. So it already happened before him, and he was completely against it, and his theory has nothing to do with it, but he was erroneously blamed for it because we don't like Darwin, therefore we'll blame him for everything bad.
Well, he was possessed by Satan to bring up this plot. Yeah, that's luring people to hell. Sure.
Let's not even get into Satan, because we don't have that long.
Yeah, we don't. Let me get to some of these other questions here. Peebo for $5. Thank you for that super chat. Of course, take a mamba home for the kitties. Let nature find its way. Smiley face. Also, good day, mate. So, I think a mamba's fine, as long as it's maybe defanged. Do they? I mean, with something like that, can you take out the venom? You can't do that. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
You defang a snake, you've killed the snake.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know people who keep hot snakes. I'm just not interested in doing it because I like to hold my snakes.
That being said,
so far I've got one warm snake, and it's a smart snake, and it's got and it's lived a good life so far, and so it's not deranged at all. So I'm okay with it. I can handle it, and he's good. I don't have to worry much about being bit by the thing. But with hot snakes, you can't have that one accident. So you never get to handle them at all.
Yeah, right. Got another question from King Xerxes for you, Aron. Did you ever get the chance to watch that video from the Hoover Institute, Mathematical Challenges to Evolution, featuring Stephen Meyer, David Berlinski, and David Gerlenter, no biologists?
Yeah, if it's the one that I'm thinking of, I wrote commentary about it before I did my foundational falsehoods of creationism. So it was like early on. I remember that video from a long time ago. I have seen it, and I remember being very, very irritated, especially at Berlinski. He just doesn't know fuck all, but he comes off looking like the most intelligent of the group, which, how embarrassing is that?
Wow.
But all of their arguments from improbability, they're a little bit different than what I was talking about before. Their arguments from improbability are more like if you put in enough factors, you put in more factors, you raise the improbability up. And so they're talking about how improbable is it that all these things happen this way. Okay, let's put it in a different perspective. How improbable is it all the things that happened to you yesterday in the exact order that everything happened to you yesterday at the precise time that those things happened to you yesterday? And not only that, but when it was happening to you, these other things were happening to these other people that caused them to be concordant with what's happening to you, so that you end up interacting with these people. And how improbable is that? All you got to do is put the right spin on. You can turn any everyday event into an impossibility. And that's the improbability fallacy. That's what they're doing. That's what that whole argument is.
Yeah, improbability fallacy.
We don't want to, so we're going to lie and make believe something else.
Yeah, and then try to feed off or try to feed a fear of large numbers, as if that's somehow going to do it. Yeah. Daniel seems to
don't mean what people think they do either. I mean, if you look at any pattern of emergent complexity coming up from the molecular scale on up to our scale, those numbers are going to be staggering at our scale, right? I mean, how many atoms are in your fingernail, right? That's already alarming. It doesn't have to be any great complexity to it. You say, oh, that's a big number. Glory to God. And then if you look at the cosmos, there's another argument against creationism. Like everything about the cosmos is an argument against young Earth creationism. But again, big numbers because they're at a different scale than we are. So
But
that's
it's a point. I make that point frequently in some of my videos. It's one of the first things that I noticed, especially when I kind of deconverted, became an atheist, was that I would hear these arguments where apologists would talk about, like, well, if you look at a snowflake and just think about the complexity of the human eye and the majesty of biology and all these things, and it's like, okay, cool. So all these things were great because God built them, and then you'd hear them in a sentence or two later. Without God, these things are just a disgusting, unsightly mess. It's all a random accident, which is interesting. It's an interesting word, two words to combine. It's all accidental. It's all mutation. Everything's just a monstrous collision of matter bumping into each other. And it's like, wait a minute. So if all of this stuff is seemingly made by a being, then it's just gorgeous. It's like when your kid makes a drawing and it's not particularly attractive, you hang it on the fridge, like, look at what my kid did. Isn't this amazing? But if that same drawing happened because they spilled the ink onto a piece of paper that was on the floor, you're like, look at this damn mess. It's just, it's such a weird way of kind of looking at the world. And
I want to address. You're right. It's the double standard. Every logical fallacy has been used as an argument for God. And every argument for God is a logical fallacy, and you'll find that creationism depends entirely on them. I mean, well, I say that creationism is all frauds, falsehoods, and fallacies, but there's not a logically coherent argument for it at all, ever. Even the Kalam, even the ones that are most celebrated, I forget Pascal's wager, all of these, they're fundamentally logically flawed. And those are the best arguments. So I want to mention something from one of your chat. Let's see, Wilberforce offers $5 and said Hitler was a social Darwinist. A social Darwinist, to stress that, and comparing that to evolution isn't even apples to oranges, it's apples to a Chrysler. Yeah. More than that, Hitler never thought about himself as a social Darwinist. Hitler didn't convey himself as a Darwinist at all. Hitler was he was a creationist, and Hitler was more following, believe it or not, Hinduism. He was integrating Hinduism in with his Christian beliefs and a number of occult beliefs as well. One of his advisors was Hindu, and when he found out of the thing about the Aryans versus the Dravidians, well, it's okay. Well, he's going to side with which meant Iranians, by the way. I said Iranians. Excuse me, being raised in Texas. But the Iranians, but of course, Hitler then casts himself as the Aryan race, as if Germans are Iranian, simply because they're white.
Yeah.
And the issue with Darwin versus Lamarck, you always want to hear that the communists were Darwinists, and one of the big issues with Stalin, for example, was that he was not a Darwinist; he was Lamarckian. So he had people gulagged or disappeared if they professors were promoting Darwinian evolution. He would only allow Lamarckian evolution, which of course doesn't work, and the result of that was Lysenkoism, which resulted in the biggest famine ever in human history, both for Russia and for China, which Mao borrowed Stalin's policies and killed a whole bunch of his old people through negligence. So the worst famine ever is because of people who refused to accept Darwinism and believed that plants are communist. And I wish I had the direct citations to go into exactly what the arguments were for how the state would sacrifice, how the plant would sacrifice itself on behalf of the state.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have those references immediately on hand.
want to get to this one here. Thank you, Scott Duke. Peter, if you can throw that one up there. Jefferson Spetchcock, once again, I recommend Jason Rosenhaus, The Failure of Mathematical Anti-Evolutionism. He debunks creationist misuse of math.
That
Okay.
sounds interesting, and I'm glad that you corrected that, because I misread it. I read down recommended something Rittenhouse is what I saw.
Like, pass.
Yeah, and I just stopped reading right there.
There was one from Daniel Seamster. I want to grab it before. Why do I always get two different definitions of faith based on who I talk to?
Yeah, I've got an article I'd be happy to link to you if you're curious about it. It's on my website, aronra.com. All my old blog posts are on aronra.com, and you just scroll down a page or two to where you see faith defined. And I give the full-on definition. This is with many citations, mostly from theologians and philosophers, past and present. Some from hymns, some from sermons, and a number of that. So if we can verify what faith is. And yeah, you're going to get two different conflations. And to say that in the first paragraph, that the argument that people use, the fallacy, in this case, the fallacy of equivocation, where you use two different definitions or two different contexts and mix them together. So for deceptive purpose. So faith in the context of religion is a firm belief for which there is no evidence. You believe because you believe in authority. You believe in an erroneous assumption of authority, but you're not convinced by it wasn't the evidence that made you conclude, hey, well, this fact is this and this, that implies that, so this must be true. No, that isn't how you got there. You believe what you were told to believe because you were told to believe it. That's how you got there.
Yeah.
And so that's faith. But then the other context that they use is faith in the context of just everyday colloquial usage of trust, as faith is a synonym of trust. But religious faith is not just trust. You need a prefix and a suffix. So faith is a complete trust that is not based on evidence. And so I don't use the colloquial version of faith ever. If I mean trust, I say trust.
Okay. And there was one here. I think I'm going to highlight this one on my own. Don't worry, Peter. I'm just going to... Oh, well, I can't see it anyway. But somebody in the chat had said, it was a question for both of us. I've been listening to call-in shows for longer than I want to admit. What are your thoughts on the way it seems that people calling in seem to have changed over time?
Was that a question for me?
I think it was a question for both of us. I don't know that I've noticed much of a change other than I think
Can I see that question? Because or can you say it again?
Yeah, it's from TP Seeker. If you happen to see it, Peter, if you want to like highlight it.
Yeah, I don't see it. So read it again for me, please.
I've been listening to call-in shows for longer than I want to admit. What are your thoughts on the way it seems that people calling in seem to have changed over time?
The best I could say is that they've seemed to have modified their arguments. I mean, once upon a time, I got that there was people would commonly say that there's no transitional species. Now they know they can't say that because they know I've got lists of hundreds or thousands if we want to go outside of vertebrates. So they try to push back the goalposts. So whereas they used to argue against evolution, they know with me they can't argue against evolution at all. So they always have to go past evolution to the origin of life. And then when they find out that I know more about that than they wanted me to, and then they got to push back to the beginning of the cosmos if there was one. And then we get to a point where I don't even care. Not only do I not know, and neither do you, I don't care.
Right.
So it's not relevant.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that irritates me the most about some of these conversations is the blatant blending coming from usually the believers with
belief system. And they think you have to, and I've heard this from believers a number of times, you have to take the whole thing as a box set. They think that belief is, you have a collection of beliefs. You have to adopt them all. And they think that science is that way, that we're told to believe something and that we have to believe it, and we have to believe all of it. And that if the creationist, if the believer can find anything wrong with any of it, then if they think that science is a belief system, the whole scientific belief system will collapse and suddenly will accept magic.
Yeah.
They don't understand that evolution has nothing to do with the beginning of the universe.
Nope.
Beginning of the universe, you can call it cosmic evolution, but we understand that when a scientist uses the word evolution, unless they're clarifying anything else, if they just are talking about evolution, they're talking about biology. They're talking about an aspect of population genetics.
Yeah.
You have to specify, no, I just mean change over time, specifically regarding chemicals or specifically regarding planetary formation or cosmic, whatever. If you just, let's discuss evolution. I know that you're going to talk about biology. You're going to be talking about genetics and populations over generations.
Yeah. And
that's to do with the origin of cosmos.
Yeah, and when I see these guys kind of do this stuff where they conflate abiogenesis, a hypothesis, with theory of evolution, and then they'll turn around and admit something like, "Oh no, I acknowledge that there's natural selection. I acknowledge that." Like, then okay, well then we're talking about that. You're talking about evolution and speciation. Why are you then, if you acknowledge that, right? It sounds like you might have some understanding of it. Why are you trying to conflate that to the genesis of all life? And yeah, anytime I've asked that, I've been removed. Usually, it's been a long time since I've even engaged in that. But I find it really frustrating that so many apologists try to do that kind of trick. They start with evolution, and then, like you said, it's a Mott and Bailey kind of thing. They'll start there, and if they realize they're talking with somebody with your background knowledge, they'll switch it up and start sliding into the origin of all life.
It's amusing when they'll do the microevolution, macroevolution thing, where they'll accept the microevolution, but actually they don't. They don't know what microevolution is. And they'll say that they reject macroevolution, but actually they don't, because they don't know what macroevolution is. Because they accept speciation, which is what macroevolution is, but they object to and reject mutation, which is what microevolution is. So, so they say that they accept microevolution, accept macro, but they've got it backwards. They don't actually understand what evolution is, period, at all. So if you understood where these new varieties come from, if you understand that mutation is the source of new genetic variants, then you understand what evolution is. Now you understand microevolution. And once you understand microevolution, now you understand that speciation is an inevitability, and you already accept that speciation happens. So we're already there. Where's this limitation? The limitation is, I want my Bible stories to be true.
And I would respect them if they just came out and said it exactly that way too. It's like the comedian, I can't remember, I'm blanking on his name. He's an Australian Canadian. He's like, there's only one good argument for guns. I like, fuck you. I like guns. That's the only argument you get. Let's see. There's one.
I know that comedian, Jim Jeffries.
Jim Jeffries, right? Yeah, that's a great bit. Let's see, Sky High.
And I say that as someone who I'm not as bad as some people I'm not. Certainly not as bad as my son. But I like guns. Okay, I'm an American. I should have a right to have an AR-15 or whatever. I advocate for that, not for the same reasons as the other Second Amendment defenders do. I understand that when the Second Amendment was written, it specifies the reason that we should have the right to bear arms is because the government needs a well-armed militia. And this was written before there was a standing army in peacetime.
Yeah.
So when we need an army, we need to be able to call on all the farmers who own their own guns already to come and defend the country. That's what that fucking meant. But now we have the most grossly over-financed military in the world. We no longer need your gun.
Yeah, in fact, the military doesn't really even need that many actual rifles when they have, drones, which your rifle is not going to do fuck all too.
Yeah, you're going to bring a knife to a gunfight, same as bringing a gun to a drone fight.
Gun to a drone, yeah, you're done. Yeah. Let's see. This question: do you see a connection between psychedelics, cave art, and the rise of early forms of religion?
Do I see where is that statement?
Peter had put it in the private chat. Do you see a connection between psychedelics, cave art, and the rise of early forms of religion?
I'm looking for that question and I'm not seeing it in the chat.
Can you see it on the screen? Peter's got it up there.
Okay,
there
yeah. Do you see a connection between psychedelics? Cave art. That's the word I couldn't have. All right, sorry. I couldn't understand what you were saying. Did he say K-bar or did he say Kmart?
See, Kmart is the rise of early forms of religion. Yes.
Yeah, psychedelics and the rise of early forms of religion. Well, we understand there's a number of factors, and I would like to do yet another presentation on the evolution of religion, because we know that part of the reason that people think that they have a soul is because they didn't know what air is. And they thought that dreams were actual visions of some form of communication, some kind of telepathic thing or whatever. They didn't understand what dreams were. They thought dreams had more significance than they do. They don't understand that's just your brain going on autopilot. And that's why, some of the dreams I've had, for example, I'm not even me in that dream. Or sometimes I start out being one person, then I turn into a different one, and now I'm the different person for the rest of the dream. Or it started out in some great mansion, and the next thing I know, I'm in somebody else's house, or I'm in a shopping mall, and then all of that changes, and now I'm back in time.
Right.
Dreams aren't supposed to make sense because they're not visions, they're not communication, but people thought they were. But then when you add to that they'll throw anything on the fire to keep warm, and some of those things will elicit interesting dreams while you're still awake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, you remember Moses talking to a burning bush?
Yeah, he was burning some bush. That's right.
Yeah, was it an opiate? So yeah, but drugs are actually at the root of a lot of different distinct religions. I mean, like peyote, and of course opium has been used in religious ceremonies, and ayahuasca. There's religions based on ayahuasca. So yeah, there's certainly is drugs based in religious belief. I mean, because this is where they think their spiritualism comes from.
Right. Let's see, just a couple more questions, and let's see, from Jay. Why do some presuppositionalists talk against evolution, as though proving evolution false would prove God to exist, when they hold the position that everyone already knows God to exist?
Yeah, two errors there. One, it is if you could disprove evolution, that wouldn't prove creationism.
Yep.
If you have any given situation, we don't have the scientific explanation for this, therefore magic. No, you need to show that magic is a thing. You need to show that your possibility is a possibility, because it's not by definition. And the other problem with that is that they're assuming that we already believe what they believe, and that we're pretending not to, so that we can sin, which doesn't make any sense at all.
No, it's never made sense.
If I believed in sin and I loved sin, I'd be a Christian, because then I can sin all I want to forever and just be forgiven for it. But sin isn't a thing. And I also know that the only way to really piss God off, if there was a God, the only way to really piss him off is to say that you don't believe in him. So saying that you don't believe in God, if you know that there is a God, saying you don't believe in him is stupid. So if you say that you don't believe in God, you're pretty sure there's not a God. You're pretty safe in that assumption. You wouldn't say it otherwise. I blaspheme the Holy Spirit all day, every day, because there ain't no God. Not just is there evidently no God, there's logically no God. We know that everything supporting the God argument is frauds, falsehoods, and fallacies. It's all bullshit. There's not one element of truth to it. No believer can give any substance for anything supernatural. And as Daniel Dennett told me directly, there is no support for mind-body dualism, either in neuroscience, and I'd already heard this from a number of neuroscientists, nor even in philosophy. And Daniel Dennett is one of the leading philosophers in the world alive today. Yeah. So without mind-body dualism, when all those arguments like Frank Turek makes, are you just a bag of chemicals? Well, I don't know if the word just applies there, but we're a bag of chemicals. You can't argue that. Whether we're just that or not, we are that. Now,
I think it's interesting that they say just and not at least. We're at least a bag of chemicals and there's a lot of cool stuff going on. But what you're trying to posit is we're that plus this other supernatural thing that's been uploaded into that bag of chemicals.
For which there is absolutely no support whatsoever,
right.
Including in the places where there definitely would be if that was a thing.
Mm-hmm. All right, this from Frozen Hand. When creationists say that a mind is necessary for logic and math to exist, doesn't that also mean that an eye is necessary to create colors when we know photons come from stars?
If a rogue planet came into this solar system, something the size of Mars, wandered into this, because there are rogue planets out there.
Mm-hmm.
They're not around a star. They're just a colossal ball of whatever, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. No amount of nukes is going to deter this thing, and it kills everybody, everything wholly on this earth. Not even bacteria alive. Any of the laws of math change? Would one thing plus another thing still equate to two of those things? Whether you understand the word two or not, whether you write the symbol for the number two, there's still recognizable. If another mind were to come into existence, they would recognize that there's two of those things. If there's one here and then there's one here and you put them together and there's two. That didn't change, right? The laws of physics don't change. None of that changes. If God didn't exist, the laws of physics wouldn't be any different.
Yeah.
And you know how we know that? God doesn't exist.
Refreshingly blunt. Yeah. Bridge the Divide. By the way, howdy, J.L. Warren. Nice to have you here. Bridge the Divide asks, it's also super weird that many still think that evolution and a God are mutually exclusive. Explaining that either shuts them up or gets you booted, dependent on who has mods. Yeah.
Indeed.
That is a weird one. I've kind of wondered about that too, because if you do bring that up, like, well, there's lots of Christians that actually acknowledge evolution. So,
Yep.
Why are you guys?
Why are you guys
bring
that up? Kent Hovind has a number of times criticized. I can't believe I can't think of his name right now. Kenneth Miller, who is outspoken scientist. He's a textbook author on biology. He writes the biology textbooks, Miller and Levine textbooks.
Okay.
And he has he's done a lot to. He's one of the great champions of evolutionary theory, but he's also a traditional Catholic. Robert Bacher is a Pentecostal reverend, and he's also the paleontologist who was he's one of the paleontologists who was doing. He was one of the experts that was like for the first Jurassic Park movie.
Yeah, they based the Grant character off him.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
Well, no, I think Grant was based on a different one. The Grant character was based on Jack Horner.
Okay, and, yeah, you might be right there.
Robert Bacher was the other one from the second movie. I've turned into Medusa. I have a snake in my hair.
I think it's that you're trying to move him, and he's like, "No, this is happening." Well, you wanted him to get more comfortable. He's definitely doing that.
Well, he's not comfortable. He's still hissing at me, stupid thing.
That's
what I wanted. What I mean by comfort, I want him to understand that he's not under threat. He doesn't have to act like a dick. The other snakes have all figured this out because they're all smarter than him.
It's a lot of attitude for a small snake.
Yeah, just wait till he gets big, because he will.
He's a constrictor, right?
Well, yeah, he is. He's not one of the constrictors. He's not a boa or a python.
Right.
Yeah. He's still a colubrid, but yes, his method of killing is by constricting, and his method of defense is by pretending to be a rattlesnake.
I think I'm going to make this the last question because I think this is a good way to sum it up. This is from Wilberforce. For Aron, has any apologist ever given a coherent rebuttal to evolution? Seriously, anyone? If so, what was it?
Not the slightest thing. I'll be lucky if I can find a creationist who knows what evolution is.
Even defines it correctly?
Yeah, because you can't even do that. Because even to define it correctly is to accept that it's a thing. So the best they can do is say that there are limits. What kind of limits? What is the limit? I don't know. There's got to be a limit. What is it? They'll say that that evolution is possible only up to a certain point. What's the certain point? Well, say families. Oh, okay, so we are in the family of apes, but not us. And they'll admit everything else has evolved. They're fine with that, just not people. And then if you dig a little bit deeper, they want it to specifically that it's white people.
Yeah, that's always
yeah.
Because
I've had a few arguments where people say that God made the different races and put them on different continents with the intention that they remain separate. And that is the KKK position.
Yeah. Yep. Or the how do some of these people describe themselves? Race realists or something like that, where they need to stay separated. And it's just it's like no, you're just a racist. Peter highlighted this one, so I'm going to read this one. What are your thoughts on possible ritualistic / proto-religious behavior in certain animals? For instance, chimps having specific trees they throw rocks at, elephants waving branches at the moon. I've actually not heard of this.
I haven't either. I mean, I've seen that chimpanzees do have a concept of death, and they understand, but they're clearly in mourning when somebody dies. Elephants do the same because they're brilliantly intelligent animals. I've never heard about an elephant waving branches at the moon. How would we even know that that's what the elephant is doing?
That's what I wonder, but that's interesting. It takes some testing to do
I wouldn't say that they're exhibiting religious belief. How would you? A religious belief, as I understand it, my definition of religion. I realize the government has a different definition. They have no definition at all. Some people's definition of religion is a system of ethics. And how do we determine whether chimpanzees don't seem to have ethics? At least if you're talking about troglodytes. If you're talking about bonobos, then maybe. But again, they certainly be right. They wouldn't be evangelical, conservative Christian ethics because they're all about orgies. So religion to me, as I understand religion, every religion that we know of, every religion that is recognized as such by both its adherents and its critics, is a faith-based belief system that posits the notion that a supernatural essence of self somehow survives the death of the physical body to continue on in some other form. How the fuck would we know if an elephant or a chimpanzee or anything else had such a belief?
Right. Yeah. How do we know the subjective inner world of these animals? Yeah.
Because there's all kinds of the traditions or the rituals that we perform. If you watched us perform a ritual, why is that Jewish man waving a chicken over his head? Is he trying to make the chicken dizzy?
I can't remember the name of that. That's the sin-eating chicken, right? I can't remember the name of that. That's for Yom Kippur, I believe. That is the craziest. Oh, man, I don't know if you know the comedian Ari Shaffir. He did a whole bit on that. And there's a part where he's talking about doing that at the age of 10. His dad does that with a chicken. And it traumatized him. And then years later, after he left Orthodox Judaism, comes back and he's like, hey, let's go do this thing over at the pond. And it's the same ritual, but you say your sins into a loaf of bread, then you break the bread up and you throw it in and you feed it to the fish. And then the fish go off and get caught by something else. So your sins dissipate with it. And he's just like, wait, we could have done this, but you had to swing that damn chicken over your head and scare me to death. Like, it's like, yeah, it's the same thing. It works the same way. It's like, why did we kill that chicken? Like, what the hell was that? All right, I think we'll have to wrap it up there because I know Peter has got an appointment with Jackson Wheat later tonight. So I think
I wish I could hang out and watch that because I like Jackson Wheat. He's brilliant.
Yeah. And I got to get.
I can't. I am so far behind at every other thing I've got to do.
Now I'm feeling bad. Well, I appreciate you making time for my tiny channel, and also thanks to Peter, who is invisible right now, but behind the scenes for producing this for me. So, and thanks to what is the bull snake's name?
This is Durango.
Durango. That's right. Durango, I hope you cheer up real quick and stop stressing out. Oh, also before I forget, what beer are you drinking tonight?
Oh, I'm drinking a local brew, Liquid Temptress.
That's a great name for a brew. Liquid
Yeah.
Temptress. It
It's
looks to be a stout.
Yeah, I think that's a 10% ABV.
Damn. Liquid loaf of bread. Oh, I hope it. All right. Well, I guess with that, Aron, thanks a lot for doing this. Thanks for stopping by, and
My pleasure,
yeah, and helping debunk a few things. Thanks to everybody who left questions. Thank you all for the super chats, and thanks for everything in the live chat that I missed. If we forgot to get to anybody, that's my fault. Hit me up with a comment in this video later, like, subscribe, to all that kind of stuff, or don't. Totally up to you. It's free country. So, Aron, do you got anything you want to say before we check out of here?
Oh, I'm good. It's your show.
Okay. Well, thanks again for being on here, Peter. Thanks for having us. And I guess we will sign out. Peter, do your thing. Take